Thank you for having me, and thanks for everybody's attention or your impending attention to what I have to say. I'll try to keep my comments brief. Brevity is not one of my strengths generally, but I've got a bit of an outline here to keep myself on track. So one of, basically my purpose, I was invited to be here, but my main objective, I guess, in coming is not necessarily just to share knowledge, but to learn as much as to share. We've heard a lot of commentary so far today, and I think all of us already know the facts of the situation in Burma, so there's no point really in me rehashing that. I'd kind of like to be a bit forward-looking in terms of what all of us, but particularly my own organization, can do to help to improve the situation of the Rohingya. So really, I guess I have more questions than answers, and that's why I'm looking forward to, well, not just everything I've been hearing so far today, but also to talking to people at the reception afterwards, and I believe the meeting that we'll be having at some point. So just to give a bit of an introduction to the Sentinel Project and why this is important to us, our mission is to actively assist communities worldwide who are threatened by mass atrocities. And really, there's no greater candidate, I think, for that kind of assistance than the Rohingya today. We're actively monitoring other situations around the world and do have some field work taking place in Kenya, particularly in the Tana Delta, but Burma is a high priority, or Myanmar is a high priority for us. So there are two kind of fundamental elements to our mission statement. There's prevention, of course, and mitigation as well. So once places at risk of mass atrocities, including genocide, are identified, of course making efforts to prevent that from happening, but also preparing for the worst case scenario if that does come to pass. And I think that is really the point that we're rapidly approaching in the case of the Rohingya, is not necessarily just a matter of preventing violence, although there's still time to do that, but also getting to the point where we need to look, you know, whether you define we as the international community in terms of states or just, you know, international civil society, we need to start looking at what we can do if things go to the extreme in Myanmar. What is it that we do to assist those people who are in harm's way? And that's one of the kind of foundational principles, or touches on one of the foundational principles of the work we do, which is cooperating directly with threatened communities. That has a lot of value for both what I think are sort of self-evident moral reasons as well as practical reasons if you're trying to influence a situation like this, as well as the use of technology, which is why I believe my portion of today's program is listed as looking at mapping and tracking anti-Rohingya events. And the reason why we place so much emphasis on technology is not because we feel that you know, social media or internet access or mobile phones or what have you in and of themselves present some kind of you know, guaranteed liberalization of the world or move towards human rights and democracy, but they do provide new tools for things like monitoring situations, mobilizing populations, gathering data, disseminating warnings to at-risk populations, and so on. Capabilities that we as NGOs did not necessarily have, you know, 20 years ago when the Rwandan genocide was happening. So one example of that would be what we're doing in Kenya, where we're using mobile phones to monitor misinformation, like rumors, which have contributed to interethnic violence, and then using that same technology to actually contain and counter those harmful rumors. Now, what does all of this mean in the case of the Rohingya? So far, our work at the Sentinel Project has focused on risk assessment and monitoring. So we did release a risk assessment report explaining why, according to the historical patterns and the framework for assessing these sorts of things, that the Rohingya are at such particularly high risk of mass atrocities, including, it looks like, genocide. It's clear that the potential is there in this situation, and as some people have argued, genocide is currently underway, if not yet in a sort of high-intensity, generalized mass-killing kind of scenario. Our goal is not really to debate on classification, whether in terms of this qualifies as genocide or as mass atrocities or crimes against humanity, or whether this is happening today or going to happen tomorrow. the writing is sort of on the wall here. We've seen that dehumanization, that immobilization, that denial of identity, that exclusion from the economy, physical violence, of course, large amounts of hate speech, and so on happening with regard to the Rohingya. So we all know what's happening here, regardless of what we call it. And sort of regardless of the legalities, although those are important, from our perspective, we're most concerned about helping those hundreds of thousands of people in danger of destruction, regardless of what we decide to label it now or tomorrow or 10 years from now. So our focus, as I mentioned, has been on doing that risk assessment process, which is how we've sort of prioritized this situation, and then monitoring and mapping what's happening on a day-to-day basis. And mapping is really a powerful tool for comprehending crises. It's not specific to this particular type of crisis. It applies to natural disasters and various other types of disasters. There's a whole field building around crisis mapping, and that's kind of what we've been doing in the case of the Rohingya. And the aim of this is to understand both in sort of geographical and chronological context how things are unfolding and how different events relate to each other. So if we're monitoring hate speech, let's say, and we can be mapping hate speech incidents in time and space, and then start correlating those to, for instance, actual acts of physical violence, whether those are lethal or not, there's great potential there for early warning. And we're trying to shift that work. And we would really appreciate help on this regard, but trying to shift that work of early warning from the very sort of macro high level down to the smaller, more tactical micro level, to go from being able to say that country X is at risk of mass atrocities in the next 3 to 5 years, to being able to say that city or neighborhood or village X is at risk of mass atrocities in the next month, week, or day. And theoretically, although this is a challenging thing to do, if you have the right information and the right analysis, it is possible. We're almost shifting in a way from big data, which we hear about a lot with regards to data that can be mined from the web, particularly social media or news media, and applying that to early warning, really down to small data. If we can get enough reliable sources within the country, within Rakhine State, at the local level, and be getting a constant flow of information, we can understand in an increasingly more granular way what is happening, how it's happening, and what's likely to happen next, and then take the appropriate measures along with that. So the question then becomes, what do we do if and when a massacre is predicted? How do we help the people who are in harm's way in order to survive more effectively? Perhaps it's by doing things like informing them to better be able to evade attackers, or to actually evacuate a particular area. We know in all mass atrocities scenarios that there are things that people within the target population do in order to try and survive, of course. And so the question, or one of the things that we need to do here is collaboratively understand, and when I say collaboratively, that includes the Rohingya population, is understand what it is that would be most effective in helping people to get out of harm's way and to survive and cope with mass atrocities, violence, including genocide, more effectively if and when that does come to pass. And then supporting them in whatever ways are possible.
Okay, bye.
Maybe she wants me to hurry
up.
Hello. So the question really is, how do we maintain this information flow both into and out of and within Myanmar? Because of course, as far as a lot of countries go technologically speaking today, although it's not as bad, I understand, as some statistics report, there still is a very low level of mobile phone and internet connectivity, and that's something that we need to work around. But the possibilities are there. All it takes is a bit of imagination.
Hello, I'm just going to see if it works.
It does work.
I can't hear you.
We can verify
Mary,
that.
Can you mute your microphone for a minute? We'll come to you.
No, that doesn't do it.
Right.
Carry on, sorry.
No problem. I'll wrap up. So the fact is that the potential is there. There are a lot of challenges to doing what we're proposing here.
I can't hear you.
Right. And so that's part of the reason why I'm so happy actually to be at this conference, is because we're looking at input from others on what exactly those needs are and how our particular
Can you hear me?
Sure can. You sure can. And how our particular expertise at the Sentinel Project sort of fits into that and can help to fill those gaps, because people here know a lot better what they are. So just in summary, the main recommendation that we would have to everybody here in this sort of field or community in general is to kind of reorient our thoughts towards direct assistance to populations. That's not to say, or the Rohingya population, that's not to say that human rights, the documentation of abuses or advocacy or humanitarian aid are not essential. They are and should continue happening, but I think we're at the point, this sort of tipping point, as it was said, where we are no longer just looking at a sort of a pre-genocidal situation. We are now quickly approaching the point where there's a very strong likelihood that soon we'll see people being directly killed, not just perhaps being starved, but with the proper triggers, being killed in large numbers, and we need to be prepared for that. What are we going to do? Because that point will be at the point where conferences and petitions and writing letters to MPs and congressmen and so on is not going to save lives any longer, at least not in the very sort of short term, where people's lives will be hanging in the balance. So that's kind of our push, just coming from where we are as an organization and our approach to things. So let's think of the worst case scenario as being something in the very near future, very likely in the near future, and planning appropriately for that, as well as looking at how we can use the tools, the technological tools, which are uniquely available to us today in order to facilitate that.
Many thanks, and thanks for also highlighting the tools that we can use to harness, or how we can harness new technologies, and apologies for the fact that some of those new technologies were getting in the way of the presentation. Many thanks.